Here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, we turn now to Puerto Rico, 3 weeks after it was devastated by Hurricane Maria. On Tuesday, President Trump asked Congress for a $4.9 billion loan to help the island pay government salaries and other expenses. This comes as he allowed a 10-day waiver of the Jones Act to lapse, restricting shipments of food, fuel, and medicine from foreign-flagged ships, as nearly half of the island still lacks clean water and nearly 90% lacks electricity. The expiration of the Jones Act waiver came over the fierce opposition of San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz, who blasted the Trump administration's slow response to the hurricane, tweeting on Sunday, "Power collapses in San Juan Hospital, with 4 patients now being transferred out, have requested support from FEMA, nothing." Federal Emergency Management Agency Chief Brock Long on Monday dismissed Mayor Cruz's comments, telling reporters, quote, "We don't have time for the political noise." Puerto Rico Governor Ricardo Rosselló said Friday that 63 of the island's 69 hospitals are operational. But reporters with the Center for Investigative Journalism say they visited several hospitals and found they had limited capacity or were even closed. On Tuesday, the official death toll from Hurricane Maria rose to 43.
This comes as military security firms continue to patrol the streets of Puerto Rico's capital, San Juan. Academy, formerly known as Blackwater, has a pending bid to provide security services for water transportation. Meanwhile, solar companies and nonprofits say they could help Puerto Rico regain power. Tesla CEO Elon Musk tweeted last week his company could help rebuild Puerto Rico's electric grid. Governor Rosselló tweeted back that the island could be Tesla's flagship project. For more, we're joined by Reverend Jesse Jackson, civil rights leader, founder and president of the Rainbow Push Coalition. He ran for president in 1984 and 1988 as a Democrat. More recently, he helped to gather aid to send to Puerto Rico, and this Saturday, he will be headed there. He's written a column published around the country this week, headlined, "How to Put Puerto Rico Back on Its Feet." We welcome you back to Democracy Now!, Reverend.
Good to see you again.
It's good to have you with us. First, I wanted to ask Juan, though, about the latest on the Jones Act and President Trump's $4.9 billion loan request.
Well, Amy, the $4.9 billion really doesn't even begin to scratch the surface, and it is a loan request. In other words, Puerto Rico has to pay it back. Because the thing is that the U.S. Imposed Control Board, which has a majority of Republican members, sent a letter to Congress last week and to President Trump on Friday, specifically saying, and I want to quote from this letter, because remember, this is now the U.S. Imposed Control Board, where in this letter it said, "Hurricane Maria and Irma have fundamentally changed Puerto Rico's reality." The Control Board goes on to say that that the island has not only a $74 billion debt and $53 billion of unfunded pension liabilities, that its economy has contracted by 15% in the last decade and the population has shrunk by 10%. But it says that it continues to have severe liquidity challenges and persistent budget deficits. So even before the hurricane hit, the government was bankrupt, had no money. And it goes on to say that on top of the damage that Puerto Rico has suffered, it's catastrophic and island-wide from this hurricane, and that Moody's has estimated that the hurricane did $95 billion in damages, 1.5 years of the total gross domestic product of the island. So this is a catastrophe on top of an existing total bankruptcy. And it says, and the board goes on to say this has never happened. And so it calls for all matching funds from the federal government for any kind of disaster relief to be waived, and it calls for massive help for the government. I want to put in context. After Hurricane Katrina, the federal government allocated $85 billion to the Gulf Coast for recovery. After Superstorm Sandy, the federal government allocated $50 billion to New York and New Jersey for recovery efforts. And we're now talking about a $4.9 billion loan to Puerto Rico. That's amazing.
You know, Puerto Ricans and Virgin Islanders are American citizens. They're not foreigners as they're projected to be. It's a structural dislocation. It's time now for massive debt relief and renegotiation. for investment, low-income. You know, Marshall Plan is not there was so much money that was given or lent to them. It was 50-year loans and 2% government secured. So a combination of debt forgiveness and investment with long-term rental loans. And the 300 American corporations have used Puerto Rico as a tax haven. They too must step up to the plate.
And what are you hoping to do with this aid package that you are putting together and taking on there on Saturday?
We want to keep Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands on the front page. Number one, I talked with the governor. He said we need medicine, and we need water, and we need generators. Now, one thing that they can do, they must have massive evacuation. Those persons who cannot get medical care we would call hospitals in this country, who receive the sick. We have massive airlifts of Puerto Ricans to the mainland. They're already Americans. Second, the children can massively airlifted to schools in the U.S. Congressman Gutierrez went there and he brought back 4 students from Puerto Rico.
The Chicago Congressman.
Indeed. So the fact that you could have massive airlifts for the sick, because if they project a year without proper generation power, many will die in hospitals or trying to get into hospitals.
Well, Reverend Jackson, you probably recall after Hurricane Katrina, there were thousands of refugees from New Orleans who were basically taken in by other states and cities. I recall interviewing.
There were citizens called refugees. They were not refugees.
Right.
They were citizens. And they were able to go first to higher ground in Baton Rouge and Houston, Chicago, New York. FEMA had evacuation money to evacuate them from a tough situation. FEMA can evacuate many people. Now, there are those who are against BACA on the one hand, who are trying to run, quote-unquote, non-whites out of the country, may find it offensive to bring more Puerto Ricans in. But Puerto Ricans are Americans, and so are citizens, and so are Virgin Islanders. And so we need something. It's good to take some medicine, some food, but given the structure, they're going to need some different kind of help, massive and quick.
And Juan, this whole issue of the Jones Act, that there was a waiver for 10 days, and people, their eyes might glaze over to hear, what is the Jones Act? But the idea that Caribbean countries could get aid from other countries, like, for example, Cuba, sent 750 doctors and health professionals around to the hurricane-ravaged places. But they couldn't come to Puerto Rico because of the Jones Act. Aid couldn't come in from other countries.
Right.
Explain what it is and what it means.
From Venezuela or from Mexico, from any of these other countries, the Jones Act means that anything coming into Puerto Rico has to be on an American ship. And so if Mexico wants to send aid or supplies, it would have to first go into Florida to be put onto an American ship to then taken to Puerto Rico. It's just driving up the cost of transporting anything.
Even President Trump said this involves our shipping companies and them making money.
Yes, well, and of course the shipping companies, together with the maritime unions who are trying to protect jobs, are in an alliance to prevent a waiver, a long-term waiver of the Jones Act, which all of the Puerto Rican leadership is calling for at this point.
Tremendous humanitarian crisis, and the crisis gives us the opportunity to address it in a meaningful way. If we have a massive debt, the banks and our government can work out a debt forgiveness program and invest in the 300 American corporations, 300 of them that are there, must pay the fast cap taxes. Again, they've used Puerto Rico as a kind of tax haven. And I think that while we are fiddling with this, people are literally dying today having slept in the dark last night.
There may even be a drug shortage in the United States because so many pharmaceutical companies are based in Puerto Rico.
Right. Although many of them have left, there's still quite a few, and companies, as you mentioned, Johnson & Johnson is a perfect example of a company that has made much money from its factories, its drug factories in Puerto Rico, and Pfizer and these others all had
within 6 days
there.
after Katrina, through FEMA, we'd evacuated people around the country, and we can evacuate people from Puerto Rico to the mainland. And I'm convinced that while we're trying to figure out whether we're going to use solar energy or whatever, people should be evacuated. Also, be very clear on the fact that these citizens are in peril, and it brings the issue of earth science to the front. So long as we allow these carcinogens to open up the ozone layer and these glaciers are melting and the waters are rising in temperature, land temperatures are rising, and the wind blows, hurricanes and tornadoes are coming. There's no infrastructure on the ground to protect us from this. The islands are in jeopardy imminently right now, not eventually, not in the future. They're jeopardized. After the hurricane season has just begun, really, you know.
So the Elon Musk proposing, let's make this a solar experiment, which sounded very interesting. But the concern also, and you talked a lot about this one, about the power grid, about this very lucrative power company and the push to privatize it. What about all this? How would this play out?
Right. Well, obviously, the Puerto Rico Electric Company is a government-owned electric company, the largest public utility in the United States, and the power industry has long wanted to privatize it, and they're trying to use this crisis to accelerate that. But that's why the issue of solar power is so important. And many solar industries are now are offering supplies now, and to begin to jumpstart the possibility of whole towns or neighborhoods beginning to develop solar power and break off from this electrical grid.
They use the crisis in New Orleans to privatize schools and jails. So some will exploit this for their own economic, ideological, and profit reasons.
And yet this comes as the EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt said Monday the federal tax credits for the wind and solar power industries should be eliminated.
Yeah, well, it's typical of where we are today in America.